March Book 1 by John Lewis.
Presentation by Angelica Sandoval, Vanessa Carrizo, and Deanna Sosa.
John Lewis was born in Troy, Alabama on February 21st, 1940. His father was a sharecropper and bought 110 acres of land for $300 cash. Everyone in the family had a job, and John was in charge of tending the chickens. He ended up growing a very special bond with the chickens. He knew each and every one of them by appearance and personality. He hated the fact that they actually had to kill the chickens for dinner, so he would never eat the chicken that was served at dinner table. Education was very important to John. Every day at school, he would go to the school library to read newspapers and magazines. Although his parents tried to hold him back from going to school during planting and harvesting season. But John always found a way to get out of it just to go back to school to learn. He was inspired to become a preacher when he grew up. Since he spent most of his time with the chickens, he would gather all the chickens up in the barn and preach to them. He would preach to them like they were an actual audience, and surprisingly, the chickens all listened. He would imagine that the chickens were his congregation. On bus rides to school, he would experience racial inequality. He would always see fancy, cleaner, better running buses pass by his beat-up school bus every day. He soon realized that only the privileged whites rode in those buses. He would pass the privileged schools that had nicer playgrounds when John's school was just a dirt field. On the way to school, he would pass prisoners working in the fields, but soon to realize that every single prisoner was black. Involvement in the Civil Rights Movement. John Lewis started a nonviolent protest with Jim Lawson. They both started off as having meetings to prepare themselves for the sit-ins they were planning. They would prepare each other and the students to prepare for what the outside world had to say about them when they started the protest. Jim Lawson prepared them to protect themselves, disarm attackers, how to protect each other, how to survive, and how to find love for your own attacker. Their sit-ins resulted to about 200 students. During one sit-in, almost everyone involved was arrested by police and taken to jail. Police had no choice but to release them all. What inspired Lewis? Lewis witnessed the Montgomery bus boycott at a young age and realized that something was wrong and he needed to take action. Martin Luther King Jr. was someone Lewis looked up to even as a kid. He would go to the school library to learn more about him. School motivated him to become more like Martin Luther King Jr. and to do better for the people of his color. College. John Lewis was accepted and attended American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville, Tennessee. He began to learn more and more about religion and philosophy, but couldn't get his mind off the social gospel. He started to feel guilty for not doing more to support the brave people fighting for justice. He then decided to apply to Troy State, but in doing so, he didn't hear back from the school for months. John decided to write letters to people who would care, like Ralph Abernathy and Fred Gray. He wrote letters to let him know what he was trying to get into. This was a big deal because Troy State did not allow any blacks into their school. Soon enough, Gray wrote back to John to go meet with King. Martin Luther King Jr. was very inspired to help out Lewis, but King had to let John know that the only way for Lewis to get into Troy State was to file a suit, but doing so meant putting his family in danger. Lewis then went back home to let his parents know the situation, and his parents said no, for the own sake of their family.
John Lewis wrote this book in the form of a graphic novel to grasp readers and help them understand the events with the use of pictures and the way the words are drawn to convey the meaning and emotion behind them. It helps to see what's happening instead of just imagining it. This way, there is no way to misinterpret the information.
Lewis was elected in the U.S. Congress in November 1986 and has served as a U.S. Representative for Georgia's 5th District since then. He is the only one alive from the Big Six to this day. The Big Six consisted of 6 very influential people, including Philip Randolph, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., James Farmer Jr., John Lewis himself, Whitney Young Jr., and Roy Wilkins. The term Big Six is used to describe the 6 most prominent African American leaders during the Civil Rights Movement. He became chairman of the SCNN Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1964. He was the director of the Voter Information Project. The VIP helps voters find information about their elections with collaborative open source tools. Lewis was a part of the 2008 presidential campaign, and he was a supporter of Senator Hillary Clinton, but then switched over his support to Barack Obama, which was a major turning point for the campaign. Honorary degrees and awards. During his lifetime, he has received many, and here are a few. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is an award presented by the President of the United States and is the highest civilian award of the United States. He also received the Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent Peace Prize, NAACP Spingarn Medal, Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Award of the National Education Association, John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award, admiration of congressional colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and John McCain's tribute in his own book on Why Courage Matters.